Hey everybody, this is Wahib, a new episode of the Goodfolks podcast. Originally, this podcast used to run in Algeria, but now we're streaming live from Berlin. Again, we're coming with this podcast with the same subjects that we used to have, but with different guests. This time, the podcast is going to be about communication, international relations, the exchange between cultures around the world. And here I have two guests with me, and without getting much into details, I would like to welcome Susanne, who's the director and CEO from the Open Culture and Transformative
Rogue Agency for Open Culture and
Okay, I'm going to give you time to explain that further. And also I have Dr. Jonas, who is a consultant, and he worked a lot before also in Ghana, in South of Sudan, in Yemen. So I will start with Susanne. Could you briefly talk about yourself and also what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. My name is Susanne Bellinghausen. I'm a co-founder of Rogue Agency for Open Culture and Critical Transformation, which is a bit of a difficult title. We are a small NGO based in Berlin, and we work very much in the field of open technology and giving access to knowledge. And we work very much in East and West African context. That is how it happened. It's kind of a process. And we work very much with grassroots organizations locally and try to give access to information for people who don't have that, either through our print material, to workshops and activities that we do. And so we have several projects on different scales against hate speech, migration projects.
When you say access to information, you mean?
Access to information on technology, on DIY. So we also have a tech part where we have a suitcase, which is kind of a laboratory in a box that gives people access to help themselves basically. And we do a lot of print material also because the context we work in often is offline. And so we do print we have media guides and open source technology guides, which we print and then, take into the context of offline information. And
Okay, sounds interesting. Dr. Jonas, could you briefly talk about what yourself and also what you do?
Yeah, well, I'm actually a trained anthropologist. Anthropology is a field where you go in communities, could be anywhere in the world, and try to understand the way they work and their internal logics and how they look at the world. And I did this with Liberian refugees from the West African country of Liberia who migrated to Ghana and returned to Liberia. So I was working with these displaced people in Ghana and Liberia, and then I began to work academically on cultural change, anthropology, and began then to use these qualitative research methods for multiple aid organizations, who try to integrate programs into the local context. And then, aside from that, since a lot of these problems associated with inequalities are quite political, I also started to write journalistically.
Okay, when you say journalistically, it means you were writing about them, reporting about them?
Yeah, but for example, write about the conflict in Yemen, about Western foreign policy, on Jacobin, for example, or Counterpunch.
All right, so this is what leads us to the topic of this episode, which is the relationship and also the communication between the global north and the global south. Before we start this podcast, we were talking about how different groups around the planet usually don't get the chance to talk to each other. So it would be very interesting since you guys worked in countries that are considered in the global south. But before that, I would like to show the maps that we have. For example, if you Google Global South, Global North, you're going to see a certain map that somehow display where these countries are. So Daniel, could you please put that on screen?
It's very Eurocentric. It's very colonial, I find. How can you divide between North. I mean, it's the thing of power. That's the division, right? I mean, trying to substitute for the developed and underdeveloped, right? I mean, third world. I mean, all these terminology is kind of I find very artificial, and trying to, the global South, the way it is defined, incorporates so many different countries and cultures, and it's just I find it very difficult. So I try not to use it.
This was actually the question that I was going to ask you, which is like how are these terms supposed to function? Because when you I think, like, what is it exactly that comes to people's mind when they hear the term Global South? Do they think about, okay, underdeveloped, poverty, no democracy? Because it's not really about the geographical. It's not about like countries that are in the north and countries that are in the south, because there are some countries that are actually in the north, but they are called the Global South, especially like in the, I think, North Asia.
Also apparently Ukraine. I mean, it's really. I mean, the definition is a financial one. It's all about where your per capita diem income is. It's economy, and I don't know if everybody sees it that way, or when they use it, if they think about that. But and it's also I just find it. I don't find it a good way of communicating.
No, but why do you think there is a problem communicating using such terms?
Because it's just generalizing, a whole group of continents, different countries, and just like equalizing in just North and South. And it's very Eurocentric also. Who came up with these terminologies? I mean, who even, identifies with it? I don't, and I don't think the people in the so-called Global South do. It's a definition that is very artificial. Okay. And so for me, I find it inappropriate.
I'm not sure if you, Dr. Jonas, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I also find it problematic. There are though, some, I think, trends that sometimes distinguish the West from the rest, not from the entire rest maybe, but there are some Western perspectives that sometimes clash with other perspectives that you would find maybe more in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And I think that's based on the experience with colonialism, as well as, other kind of like situations where there was unequal power, like during the Cold War. It's not very far, it's not been a very long time since that passed, when the West was kind of like supporting different dictators and fighters, and then yet the war on terror and Europe externalizing its borders. So that sometimes leads to different perspectives, I think. For example, when there was the vote on the Ukraine, a lot of countries outside of the West abstained. And I think they shouldn't have, maybe, because it was a war of aggression. But I feel it seemed like after the war on terror and everything that was going on, they did not want to necessarily join the West in its condemnation. And now with Israel and Gaza, you all of a sudden have the West no longer supporting humanitarian law by supporting Israel logistically and diplomatically in all kinds of ways. But now it's maybe not the Global South, but a lot of countries outside of the West have a very different view on that conflict compared to Western countries. So I think there is some different, maybe countries that had colonialism and like maybe imperial structures that they had to deal with versus countries that didn't, or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Which means that when we talk about this distinction of Global South and Global North, we're not only talking about financial maybe aspects, but also the way they look at the world is differently, and the way they look at the world is driven by their past and what they went through, and so they're not looking at the same issues the same way.
Well, I think colonialism and exploitation, it's all about power. It plays a big role, and that's where also that how do you call it, that imbalance comes from. Okay. And I mean, if you say they, who's they, right? So it's like all these countries have such different, let's look at Africa, so many different countries that have different experiences. But I mean, most of them do suffer still from colonialism and the way, the global north or the west deals with them, and yeah, that is very difficult.
Right. So I want to dig into your experience. Do you want to say something? Sorry.
I was just reminded, like, it's always difficult. For example, after independence, the African leaders sometimes said we are very different, but we had that common experience, and there was also the idea of pan-Arabism. But it's true, one has to really be historically specific, as you say, about these kind of things.
Okay. In your experiences, when you worked in Yemen and you also worked, I'm not sure which countries you worked on in Africa.
South Sudan, Uganda,
Yes, South Sudan, Uganda.
Cameroon.
When you were on ground, how were you treated, and how did people communicate with you?
Well, it's a bit of a complex question in the sense that so there is very often in I think this development sector, the way it's called, organizations that are bigger than ours. They do have their own offices, so people actually live there, and I think that we deal with that, and so rogue also means to deal with things differently. We believe that it's important that we have a partner that actually knows what's going on the ground. So when I go, I basically visit our partner and get introduced to the work on the ground that they do together with us. But they're the ones who have the knowledge of the work on the ground. So for me, I always come into a very, a nice context of already being, people know me because, we do work online quite a bit and communicate. So for me, when I go there, it's like, it's like coming to a big team meeting in person. And so I find, I find the communication, we're just part of a big team. I mean, for the work that we do in the team. If you mean people that are outside of the team, or outside of the people that
team, probably they already know you. But I'm talking about the locals, for instance. When you walk around, how did you feel? I think a lot of people from countries, for example, here in Europe, they would avoid certain places around the world without having any idea about them.
Yeah.
But they think that they might be dangerous, or because I am blonde, or because they might steal me, or maybe they steal my money, or they look at me as a passport opportunity, or so things like that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I grew up in Kenya, so for me, it's like my father was a diplomat,
Okay.
so I'm a little bit accustomed to the situation, so I don't find it strange or anything. But I mean, of course, there is the white factor, right? So I can never be incognito. So if I walk down the street, of course, it's obvious that I'm
Not from there.
Yeah, I'm not from there, and most of the time people are very friendly. But of course, there's things like, I don't know, when I'm with my colleague in the car and we get stopped and they see me in the car, then we all need to get out, because of course behavior is different if there's a white person involved than if there's not. So sometimes I just stay in the background so that things go smoothly. But I actually really have good experience, I must say.
There are multiple aspects to it, one is that one is an outsider, but usually extreme generosity and extreme hospitality is what I experience. In Yemen, you sat somewhere and somebody brings you chicken or water or rice or, cookies. You receive like a lot of gifts, a lot of respect, but then also there's some hope, associated with you sometimes in situations of poverty. But I think then when I look at the programs, there's also skepticism that comes through. For example, I was working on a project to find out more about how community mobilizers have been able to overcome polio skepticism in communities. And this was after the war on terror. A Muslim population started to believe that this was a scheme to make Muslim populations infertile. In Yemen, people thought that the NGO might be part of a war effort. In Liberia during Ebola, there were also well, they were maybe not as associated to the West, these fears, but one author argued also that there was some of that. But then also I feel like when I'm in these places, I have a lot of privilege because I can always leave. For example, when there was Ebola, I had to leave the country.
Oh, you were there at the time of Ebola?
Exactly, yeah, for the beginning. And then when I came back, a bit more than a year later, they said, oh, people were happy to see me, but one person said, oh, you ran from Ebola. So there's always that in situations where there is lack of stability, oftentimes you have a lot more privileges, including that you sometimes one of the few people can actually leave the place.
That's very sad, right?
Yeah, in Yemen, very, very few people can leave the country, and then you say goodbye at the airport, but you feel like this is kind of like, it's quite a privilege.
To be able to travel.
Exactly, yeah.
So why is it that they cannot leave the country?
Well, oftentimes there is financial issues. Then Yemenis, they cannot travel to many countries, for example,
I mean,
South Sudan is neither, right?
Yeah, with our colleagues, we experience that a lot. And visa is a huge issue, right? I mean, so yes, we do also need to apply for a visa, but most of the time it's granted, right? But if we want our colleagues to come to Germany, which we do quite often, it's always a big battle. I mean, to get a visa, they're really trying to, make this very difficult.
Well, I mean, it's actually the same in Algeria, where you have to prepare a bunch of a lot of papers. And most of the time, you get rejected, especially if you're young and don't have a job, or maybe you have a job, but the job does not really.
You won't return. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because they're looking for a proof, something that make them sure that you're not gonna overstay your visa. And it is a problem. Some people actually argue that maybe we should have open borders, and then people will get to experience how it's like to be in other places, and then the motivation to just leave will
to go down.
But that's still a theory, and I'm still not sure about that. I also met, especially studying, for example, here in Berlin, international relations, I met some classmates who believed that we should have open borders. They said because in the past, Europeans used to go to any place they want, even when their countries were not doing well. But then once their countries started doing well and other countries are not, they closed the borders, and they want.
I think it would be a good experiment to actually do that. It's difficult, but I think it would be closing borders is not a solution, and we can see that. It
seems to be what's been going on a lot, closing in recent history.
I think that the best thing to prevent maybe illegal immigration is usually trying to make those places good places to live at, so that people don't want to just leave them. But looking how those places are, then of course people want to, they would do anything just to leave.
Yeah, yet the European Union, spends a lot of money, including in Algeria, to make sure that there's a lot less migration.
In the sea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, uses local warlords, sometimes in Libya, indirectly to detain migrants, which has led to torture and other really bad human rights abuses. So unfortunately, I think we're moving quite far away from open borders.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Because all these countries, they have all these new systems to detect and apprehend migrants these days.
Yeah, but I'm also not sure about open borders. If you have open borders, and then I understand the attractiveness of the theory. I also want to know what's going to happen. Yeah, but at the same time, if a catastrophe happens, then you won't have a chance to come back. If a lot of people come, and then how are you going to educate them? How are you going to with the jobs, provide jobs, provide houses. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, that's true.
So I want to know why would some groups feel threatened by the existence of foreigners in their countries? For example, I am Algerian, I am North African, I am a Muslim. Why am I a threat or a danger or a problem to anybody or any group, for example, here in Germany or in Europe, based on how they think?
Yeah. I mean, I think there will probably be many different explanations to that. Maybe I can answer it in regards to Germany.
Okay.
I think, I mean, one explanation that's often used is that people in East Germany experienced, like, after the reunion, a lot of economic transformations, and they didn't really end up being as economically successful as Westerners, and kind of that there's a lot of alienation in society. Also in parts of the West, like the Ruhr area or some other places, and people, they identify these changes with foreigners. I think that's one explanation, along with like a long history of racism. What do you think might be other reasons?
I could imagine that the fact that, you know, the being different, right? I mean, looking now at, so I don't think we can generalize this for all Germans, but I guess the ones that do have a problem, I could imagine is just because, you know, it's different to what they know. The religion is different, you know, the language is different, the cultural background is different. And, you know, not everybody is, you know, willing and open to embrace new cultures, right? So that's where this thing comes from, you know, they need to adapt to our culture, which is, you know, not very creative because, of course, you know, a culture is diverse and that's what makes it interesting. And, you know, the more diversity we have, the better. But I think in conservative thinking, that often is seen as a threat to, you know, their culture, their idea of what is correct and is not correct, right? So that's how I would interpret that. I mean, that's the only thing I can really, and I think that's, yeah, East-West, I don't think it makes that much, I mean, now in German context, that much of a difference. I think it's really, yeah.
So you don't think it's no longer the case? Because before coming to Germany, I also heard that people were saying like, okay, the east of Germany and the west of Germany are not the same, and try not to live in the east.
Yeah, they're not the same, of course.
Yeah, but I think that just sometimes, I mean, also a little exaggerated. You know, I think it's true. Like the east is not just. There are also plenty of places in the west that, like, where was it, Hessen, right, where the AfD was very successful, or which I don't know, it was Thüringen and some place in the west, yeah. But yeah, and it's not like everywhere, you know, foreigners would be like in danger or something, but historically, like after the wall came down, people often talked about the West having issues with the extreme right, but I think now it's kind of all Germany and much of Europe.
But do you have bad experience?
To be honest, I don't. And when it comes to the adaptation, I think it makes sense, for example, to make sure like you follow the rules and try not to be disrespectful, you know, just, but then sometimes there are some sort of unwritten rules that people don't really know about. And then they are surprised, they are just caught by chance offending some German by doing something.
Which kind of rules?
Okay, so I remember this funny experience of actually a fellow student here in Berlin who went to the supermarket to Rewe. I think she was wearing just a flip-flop, so not shoes. And then there was like this woman, when she saw her, she was like, keine Kultura, keine Kultura.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when she told me, I was like, okay, so what if somebody is injured, or maybe their fingers are hurting, or they came from...
That's weird.
Like, why would you...
I wouldn't even notice that. People, weird.
So it's, it made me question, like, is this considered like a disrespect in public, not to wear shoes, for example, in the supermarket? And then when people are here, they are new, for example, and don't speak German, and they don't have a lot of German friends, they don't get to distinguish between what is actually German and what is just an individualistic judgment and opinion of a certain German.
Yeah. But it's interesting when you said, you know, be friendly and you know, stick to the rules. But for example, Germans are not known for being particularly friendly, right? So, you know, this greeting people, and you know that sometimes is not even so much of a German thing, whereas, you know, in other cultures is to be friendly to each other is a big thing. And I think sometimes, you know, Germany lacks that a little bit. So that's also difficult, I find, to adjust to.
I've always heard about that, but in what way? What do you think?
Well, I totally agree. I think that, maybe Berlin is also a special case, but people are sometimes just too rude for my liking. It's like riding a bike in Berlin. I mean, you get shouted at so much for, diverse reasons. Sometimes it's really too much. It's like, okay, come on, just, you have no other problems. Just, be friendly and chill. I don't know.
So,
but
is there something you want to add about this?
Not to this, actually. Yeah.
It seems like it's a topic that you're still thinking about.
Oh no! I think I was just recently. I thought like maybe Berlin is nicer than I thought, But then sometimes you have these experiences as well, So I have no conclusion.
I mean, I lived in Darmstadt before. People were also really nice, to be honest. It's just that there is this stereotype that Germans really don't like, for instance, when they see you violating the law. Like if they see you doing something in
Cross
public.
by a red light.
Yeah, that would be like yelling at you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yet, like in other countries, probably they would just be. They wouldn't.
I'm walking. There's no car coming. Just move. Yeah.
Probably they wouldn't care. It's for the police job to make sure.
It is true. There is this thing about observing people and making comments, which is really none of your business. That is a very German thing.
I have to say, German, from all places I've been, I mean, being a German, comparing it to other places, I think Germany is the most direct culture that I know, probably. I mean, that's probably, if I came from maybe Yemen or Ghana, the directness, I think that would be something.
The way people address you?
I mean, for example, work complaints. I mean, sometimes in some cultures, in Yemen, for example, you address a complaint very indirectly. You talk to maybe a relative or somebody else. It's more of a it's a different type of culture in that regard. In Germany, when you're at a workplace, people tell you, you did this wrong, which the second also has some advantages, but do you find German culture very direct?
Sure. That's the thing. I'm really not sure about that.
Okay.
Like the idea that you would call the police, for example, because your neighbor is playing music or doing some noise, instead of talking to them, for instance, is not really direct. And I've seen things like that happen a lot, where people just go directly to the authority rather than they talk to the person to stop doing that thing. Okay. Maybe in other cultures they would let the authority to be the last step. When they talk to you and you don't change your behavior, then they realize that you don't understand. Yeah. And there is also something else. Or you want to comment about this?
No, I actually am.
There is also something else that happened where people. For example, they would, those accommodation agencies, when they send you email, and this is just for the sake of example, and they would tell you you do this or we will fine you. And for me, the first time I came here, and I noticed that from different administrations, they use this language a lot. Yeah. Instead of asking you to do something, they would ask you to do it, and then they add another sentence, or we will do something.
Yeah. And now it's helpful.
You know what to expect.
Yeah.
And then coming from my culture,
that's what I mean.
Yeah, the initial reaction is are you threatening me?
Yeah. Come to your office now.
You could have just asked, and I would do it. Yeah. That's it. You don't have to mention the punishment of not doing that. The consequence. But I don't know.
It's implying that you probably will not follow the rules.
Exactly.
And then, quite honestly, without those little punishment notes, I probably wouldn't do many of these things. I'm okay, this has to be done now. Yeah.
It's you feel as if they assumed that without telling you that, you're not gonna. Yeah, you're not.
gonna stick to it.
So they will have to mention the.
But I think it's interesting because I wonder if people make these rules. Often it's something that you would not do yourself. That's why you need to, make these comments. I sometimes wonder if they wouldn't say that if they wouldn't think that. Otherwise, they themselves wouldn't stick to the rules if they wouldn't threaten. So it's a bit of a weird concept of how people always imply. Why would they think that way? Yeah.
They're projecting.
Yeah, exactly. That's the wording I was looking for. They're projecting from themselves. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to move to something else. I want to show you an interesting study that I came across last time, which is the oxytocin hormone. Daniel, could you pull that up? So I think the study was done in 2009, but I found this article really recently. It's called The Love-Hate Relationship, Feel Good Oxytocin Might Have a Dark Side. For those who do not know, this is the same hormone that is released when the mother is breastfeeding her child. It's often thought of as a love drug and is linked with all kinds of feel-good emotions in people, such as trust, empathy, and generosity. But scientists are finding that this hormone also has a dark side, and now researchers have discovered that it can also promote ethnocentrism, xenophobia, prejudice, and violence. If we could go just to the next picture of this article, I want to highlight the experiment they did, just like to know like how they found that out. So in 5 experiments, 280 male Dutch volunteers first inhaled a spray containing either oxytocin or a placebo. In the first 2 experiments, participants hit one button if they saw a positive word, such as wonderful, or the name of a fellow Dutchman on the computer, such as Martin. They pushed another key if they saw a negative word, such as awful, or a foreign name. So, for example, like my name. These groupings were then reversed. The volunteers pushed one button if they saw a positive word or a foreign name, and the other if they saw a negative word or a domestic name. Arab names, such as Ahmed, were used in the first experiment, and German ones, such as Helmut, in the second. The researchers found that in both cases, volunteers given oxytocin were faster at linking fellow Dutchmen with positive words. There was also significant evidence that Arabs were more often linked with negative words and weaker signs that Germans were. Also, the next slide, please. Okay, let's continue.
Well, you know, for me, I don't find this such a surprise, actually, because I think it just has to do with extreme emotion, right? And
Exactly.
love and hate is very close to each other, right? I mean, there's also, I mean, even for mothers, there's this phenomena where, you know, you give birth and the emotions are just so much that you actually cannot, you know, you get psychological problems. So so I find it's just a state of high emotion, I would say, what this hormone does. So
we can like comment more about that. I want to continue the experiment here. In a third experiment, the scientists investigated the extent to which volunteers ascribed uniquely human emotions such as admiration or contempt to fellow countrymen or foreigners, as opposed to more basic ones such as exhaustion and pleasure. Participants given oxytocin were significantly more likely to associate more human emotions with Netherlanders than with Arabs, although they were equally likely to associate positive and negative emotions to either group. In the last experiments, volunteers were given the option to save the lives. Okay, this is interesting. This is where it gets interesting. You save the lives of 5 nameless people by sacrificing one other person. These lone individuals either had typical Dutch male names or foreign ones. Arab names in the 4th experiment and German ones in the 5th. Participants given oxytocin sacrificed foreigners more often than fellow Dutchmen. This isn't because they mercilessly sacrifice more outsiders than volunteers given placebo did. Rather, they protectively sacrificed fellow Dutchmen. Okay, we just lost the net result is that oxytocin makes people prefer their own group over other groups, and thus sets the stage for prejudice and social discrimination. So the idea that, I mean, at least what I concluded from this study is that as if like we're saying that the people who love their group mostly are also the ones that hate other groups. I'm not generalizing here, but it could be also something that is associated with extreme maybe nationalism or love for one's group or one's identity that might also make you feel that the others or like them are quite threatening to what you are.
I've never thought about that.
It's an interesting study, a bit depressing. It's like to think that the racists are happier. But the thing is, But I think I would agree. You know, it's this like in human history we always thought about the closeness of love and hate or contempt. You know, even like the story of Adam and Eve and the Exodus from paradise is like one of these examples. And because the idea is that we wanted to have happiness and free will, and so we will do things our own way. And I think that's something, that's something that's always pretty close. This love and hate. You also sometimes see it in relationships. Yeah.
You see, it's interesting. Here, for example, when I started studying here in Germany, I remember once in a class, there was a German guy who was talking about how he was a bit anxious because he was walking by a certain house that where the owner was holding the German flag. He said, like, I felt like really scary about that. And then for me, it was like, okay, this is weird. Like, why would you feel scared when somebody raised like a German flag?
Was it a German person?
Yeah, it was a German person.
Absolutely, I totally understand, and I'm always trying to.
I could not understand.
Yeah, yes,
I
but
understand it too.
absolutely. I think if you're German, you understand. So Germany has, of course, a very difficult past and history. So we were never, I mean, at least our generation, never proud to be German or of the German flag or anything that has to do with nationalism.
Yeah,
so
football.
yeah, it started with football where people were actually putting flags on their cars. Like, what? I mean, you know, and as I'm married to a Canadian and Canadians have their flag all over the place, it's like, for me, we're not proud. We're not proud to show, but it's slowly changing. I think it's also a generational change. But yeah, absolutely. So if you see somebody putting a flag out their house, you would think that person is very nationalist and probably, you know, right-wing fascist. So that's all the thoughts that go through your mind.
Might not be true, but you think
might not be
that,
true. Might just, you know, but that's the prejudice that at least our generation, I cannot talk for anybody else, but definitely we do have,
Yeah, it was unusual to have the flag.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know which year, but it was a World Cup in Germany.
2018 or something.
Something like
when
this,
it
it
started.
changed,
Yeah, that changed a little bit, but so I totally understand that person, yes. I agree.
And this is what makes me question, can we not have a healthy version of nationalism?
Absolutely. We should, but I think, you know, that Germany would have to go into a collective therapy or something or at least, you know,
Maybe a change of generations?
yeah, I think so. I think it's already happening. I think, you know, my children already deal with it in a very different way.
They raise the flags when Germany...
No. No, they don't, but yeah. It's funny, our project manager in Cameroon just very proudly showed us that he put in the office, he put up this German flag and Cameroonian flag, you know, the way you see it when you have state visits come. So he's very, and they're proud and it's nice. But it's like, okay, we'd never do that.
So in your experiences, like how do you think nationalism is manifest in other countries? Like for instance, when you worked in Africa, have you felt that people there are more nationalists, for instance?
Well, I think they have, as you said, a healthier relationship to their national identity, which I really enjoy. If it's not us, if it's not Germany, I really enjoy it, that people are so proud of their country, which they should be, because, you know, all the countries I've been to are so wonderful. I mean, so I think, I think it's really nice.
I wouldn't be opposed to Germans, you know, having more pride, you know, but yeah, it's a different relation. Yeah, I think in African countries, I mean, there had to be like kind of also some national identity to bring all these groups together, and I think that's part of the reason why people are really also behind that idea.
The idea of
just bringing different, you know, groups that are, you know, a lot of the African countries, they have been carved up by European powers, and there are multiple ethnic groups in there that didn't have much history with each other. And so oftentimes, like some of the leaders after independence, like Kenyatta, they used language or national symbolisms so that these nations had some kind of coherence, you know. At least that's always what when I see pride in Africa, I always think of that history.
I remember once here in Germany, I had a German teacher who were watching, I think, football game. Germany was playing, I think, against Japan, or I forgot which team. And he was actually supporting the other team. And I said, like, why? He said, like, I just want others to win.
You do that too?
Yeah.
And I did not understand that. I found this like really strange. So it was very hard for me just like to understand the culture slowly. But I understand how much that it is connected with history.
Yeah, history is a big wound.
Yeah. It's just that, as I said, like probably we should move to, because the humans have like this tendency to jump from extreme to extreme, either like extreme no or extreme yes, and it could be something in the middle.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see? Now I want to jump to something else that probably you will enjoy. I want to display the marketing ad of IKEA. Now I will have to explain this because this is very interesting. So IKEA is a furniture company. It's a Swedish company, and they were running like different marketing ads. So the picture that we have on the left is the marketing ad they had in Europe. I think also like in Sweden, and the one on the right is the marketing ad in Saudi Arabia. So it's a franchise. It's a branch from IKEA in Saudi Arabia that decided that this is the marketing ad that they will show there. And you can see that they removed the women. Of course, it caused an outrage. People were really angry, and IKEA had to apologize. It was considered a very sexist, misogynistic way of excluding women from society. But it's interesting because as if like the marketing manager there assumed that this is what the people in Saudi Arabia would like. And you see, so even like the communication between the global south and global north, and sorry for using that name, but this is just trying to make a point here that sometimes I see it as if like it's limited by diplomats and corporations that don't really make a bridge between those like different cultures, but instead they just do what is good for the business, even if it has to violate some.
So I assume that this ad manager in Saudi Arabia was a Saudi Arabian manager, not a Swedish.
No, Swedish.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't taken from the local context saying, "Oh, we cannot display this. We need to change it." So the Swede thought, "Oh, that
Exactly.
doesn't." Oh, okay.
So that's what the Swede person thought of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And the first time I saw this, it was weird for me because I mean, growing up in Algeria, I used to watch some TV channels where we had some ads from Saudi Arabia. They were actually women. Yeah, women usually with hijab, you know.
Yeah,
but the idea that not women at all is like taken to the extreme to some extent. I'm not sure if there are some people who think that women shouldn't be in the media at all, but I'm sure that these should be like very minority in Saudi Arabia. And then put in a picture like that, some sort of solidify the stereotypes that maybe Europeans have about these countries. And then will probably increase the fear from foreigners. They think that they come to our countries and this is how they will turn,
They will be deleted from it.
turn our country.
Yeah, it is problematic.
Yeah, so do you have any feedback about that when it comes to how corporations deal with, especially since you worked in, probably you met the German embassy there, maybe some German companies maybe in those countries?
No, we don't deal with businesses. So but I think it just shows, and that's why I was asking. I was thinking that this would have been a local project manager or a PR person, and that just shows that I think the way we work is actually the right way to go about it. Is to it's not a decision to be made by IKEA in Sweden. It's a decision to be made by the person who locally works there and knows, what is offensive, what is not offensive. Because of course, I mean, I do understand that IKEA does not want to offend anyone with their advertisement, which is, of course, targeted for each country probably differently. And therefore, I think it is so important to work with people on the ground to actually know, what is needed, what is not needed, what is offensive, what is not offensive, and don't work with stereotypes, or I guess with their own. Everybody has stereotypes, but with their own stereotypes. So, yeah, for me, that makes all the difference, is to work with a local person. And that's what we do.
My worry most of the time is just that how, let's say, for example, it happened in my country. I'm worried about how my culture was depicted.
Yeah.
for other people who don't know my country.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I talk to some people and then, in the conversation, for example, I say that, this woman was divorced or whatever, and then the person is like, so Muslim women are allowed to divorce? I'm like, why did you assume that they are not?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm worried about like where some information are coming from, and if they're coming from the most extreme people, because usually this is like the loudest voices are the ones that are like, like on the surface.
But, I would say also German media has become specifically a little Islamophobe. I think if you would look like Welt TV or BZ, I mean, there's a lot of negative depictions on Muslim cultures, in Germany, or also the way they treat the Palestine issues. So I think it also has something to do with that, unfortunately.
But what do you mean by? Do you have an example in mind of how media can be Islamophobe?
Oh, I mean,
Usually, I try to stay away from these words. Because they could be put in a lot of.
yeah, I mean, I think, for example, I mean, there is oftentimes a lot of coverage of clans. They like to say, oh, these are clans. These are clans of Arab men, and it's a little scary. And also like always to depict like always depict Muslim women. I mean, there is a lot of oppression, but to pretend like, oh, oppression of women is typical for all of the diverse countries and cultures that constitute global Islam. And and I think since the war on terror and so on, there's been some Islamophobia generally in Western countries, and that's why people have these massively negative interpretations.
So you think it's not like a fair represent? Because I'm just asking here because I haven't watched much of the media, the movie, German movies and stuff like that. So you think it's not a fair representation?
Recently, not. I mean, there's a lot of coverage, on the need for Islam to change. Which I mean, there's probably need to change. But it comes from the outside, like and do we have to make some concessions to the right? And I also think like the way the whole Israel-Palestine conflict is depicted, where they say, "Oh, are the number of deaths really true?" I think there's some Islamophobia. I don't think everyone is Islamophobic at all. I think most people are not. But sometimes I see this. Do you observe the same problem in Germany?
To be honest, I don't really know because I also don't really follow. I mean, I'm sure since the 9/11, long time ago, it wasn't definitely in the media wasn't favorable. But I can't really.
If you watch like ARD and ZDF, for example, and talk shows and so on, that's that would be my observation.
Was there anything that surprised you, for instance, when you went to Yemen, in the sense that this is how I thought about this place, and then when I went there, this is what I discovered?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I was actually, I didn't have many expectations, I would say that, the Yemenis, generally speaking, I mean, you can't always say this, but it's extremely like a society with deep, like, historical ties, and people they determine a lot of things based on family networks, like they would say something like, oh, you meet somebody and say, we maybe be able to work with this person because he's the son of a judge, of an imam. And I thought that was something like the deep historical roots,
What is that? You're able to work with somebody just because they're like a relative of somebody else, or with
exactly, yeah,
with like a high position?
Yeah, I mean, I think the family networks, that surprised me, But people were extremely gentle and nice and dignified, but it didn't surprise me that much because I always encountered really cool people when I was traveling.
Yeah, there is usually the stereotype that, but I think it's true to some extent that, like in Western countries, they're more individualistic, but in these other countries that we're talking about, they have more like family gatherings, and
That's
they
why also something is a lot less individualism sometimes.
less individualism. So the same question to you, Suzanne. Like when you went to these countries, like in Africa, did you feel like there was anything like surprised you, like how you thought about it and then how you found out on the ground?
That's a trick question, to be honest.
I mean, you definitely sound like a multicultural person. That's somebody who's aware of like different.
Trick question.
Or maybe since you were raised in Kenya,
Yeah, for me it's not
was
so.
there something that surprised you when you came back to Germany?
Oh, lots of things. I was a kid, right? So I didn't know how to, take a train and all that kind of stuff. So for me, that's more difficult because people look at you and say, "You're German, you don't know how to do this." It's like, okay. No, I think, to be honest.
What is that? We don't know about this story of the train, and people don't.
No, it's like if you travel a lot and you live abroad and then you come back to your own country and don't know how to do some of the things that people that grow up there know how to do them, and then they look at you and say like.
But like what?
Like for example, I had grown up in Nairobi. I'd never taken a tram, so I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to. It's like for me I was young. I was like 10, 11 years old. So you start to feel like a stranger in your own country, and I guess that's also why you have to come back every 3 years so that you actually get grounded and.
But you also, I mean, I've only heard about some stories of Germans who went to actually, because I know somebody. She went to work in humanitarian aid programs in Africa. And then when she came back, she said like she completely changed because she started to see like the privileges that we have, for example, here in Germany, that we often don't know about, like unless we go to other places and see how people are living.
That's true.
So it does make you feel like you're grateful about your life. Did this something that you experienced?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I did see, like having seen some crisis situation, I really think of that a lot, like how good we have it and what are our obligations as a result.
But I also think there's a lot of prejudice. I mean, I just went on this trip to Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda. I drove with my colleagues from Nairobi to northern Uganda. And, yes, we do have a ton of privileges. I will not say that that's not true. But then I realized, oh, my God, this is such a beautiful, such beautiful countries. It was such an amazing trip. And then I realized I have to come back to Germany, and it's gray and cold, and it's like it has two sides to it, right?
That's true.
And very often, if you talk about African countries, the prejudice that people have is poverty and crisis, but there is so much positive. I mean, just the fact also that I think, just like in Yemen, I think 50% of the population is young people, right? It's creativity. I mean, the refugee settlements in Uganda is full of people that are creative, and I've met so many people that are, activists, that are musicians, that have a story to tell, and nobody talks about that, right? And so that for me also, makes me feel that I want to do the work I want to do because I maybe have a little bit of a chance to, support these people to actually do what they want to do, and of course, being disadvantaged by being in a refugee settlement and having to leave your home is a very difficult situation. But there's so much potential.
Would you support them in their countries, or you support them, for example, by showcase their talents, for instance, here?
We tried to do that. Very difficult to get funding for that, but we did. For example, with the Defy It Now project that we had, we also had an art part to it, because I think it's very important. Because I think, especially in Africa, but in general, music, storytelling, art is a great way to communicate. Not everybody can read, right? I mean, you need to find different ways of reaching a lot of people. And so we had workshops with musicians, and we created our own song, peace song, and went viral online. It was really nice, and that made me realize. I mean, we just got I think 10 musicians together, and they wrote a song together and performed it, and everybody in their local language, and it was just for me it was eye-opening. I was like, wow, yeah, there's so much creativity, and yeah.
Because there is often sometimes a challenge for the UN and embassies and different international organizations when they try to support, for example, entrepreneurs in these countries, maybe in third world countries, because for the interest that to develop the economy there or something. But then because of the laws, because of some maybe corruption, different problems, then they feel like the only way to support them is by bringing them.
No, but there's a whole lot of programs of how to set up businesses locally. I mean, that definitely is being supported quite a bit because, the idea is if you bring someone to Germany, then it's a temporary thing, right? It's not sustainable.
And it's not also helping those countries.
It's not sustainable.
Because there will also be other people in need.
Yeah. I mean, we did want to bring that music project to Germany just because we thought it would be a great exposure and, experience for the musicians, but we never got funding for it, so that didn't work. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add, or?
No, actually, for now, I agree.
It's good.
For now.
All right, now I want to jump to the last thing, which is like proposed solutions when it comes to this communication between Global North and Global South. I'm trying to cover all sensitive issues here to have a very honest conversation about everything. Now, let's talk about the concept of. It's suggested that we need to have more diversity in the media, in art and media. And I want Daniel to pull up the last picture of James Bond. The James Bond movie. That's not, of course, this is not James Bond. So M16 is, by the way, is the intelligence agency of the UK. And James Bond is known of the spy movies. M16 chiefs want next James Bond actor to be black or female. Intelligence experience speculates. So this is something that was suggested a lot, and usually the left, like liberals, for example, in Europe, and they think that the way to lessen the stereotypes and maybe break the walls of prejudice among the different communities, different groups, is by allowing equal representation, for example, especially in the movies that we watch, like on Netflix, and art, wherever. Is this something that you support or not?
I support it, yeah. I'd say it's important that there's more diversity in representation in media. I think it helps, the children, who are not male and white to say, oh, there's something I could do. I would say sometimes when there is let's say a corporation that is corrupt or questionable government agencies and so on, and they advertise with diversity, then we also have to ask are they just, advertising this diversity, or are they actually harming?
Living it.
Yeah, living it, or are they harming dispossessed populations, even though they might have showcase diversity in their PR.
But then don't you think that by doing that, as if we are assuming that in our childhood, without seeing other communities, means that we're going to be hostile to other communities? Because honestly, it didn't happen to me. I didn't watch in cartoons, for example, people from Asia or Latin America. It doesn't mean that when I grew up, the first time I meet some people from those communities, I'm gonna assume that these people I become mean to them to some extent. So because this is a subject, I noticed that it's subject, for example, here in Europe and in the US, that we need put more African Americans.
Well, I think I think it needs to represent society, and society is diverse. So I agree. I think it's an okay idea to do, but it's the tip of the iceberg. If it's just a picture, right? And we have H&M now also has very diverse advertisement, which I think is great because lots of different people live in Europe and need to be represented. But if it doesn't make a change in how we behave and how we incorporate and are tolerant towards each other, then the advertisement doesn't do anything. Exactly. If it's just a PR gag, then it's useless. And so I think it needs to go. It's like we just had this anti-racism training, and the trainer was talking about an institution that she works in. Everybody has now a diversity officer. How do you call that in English? Which I think is really good. And because we do need to pay more attention and we do need to educate ourselves. But if you just do it because it looks good and I can say, oh, but I have a diversity officer here, then it's useless, right? You really need to want to actually, work with people, work on issues that definitely our society has, then that's fine. But if it's just, they're putting some makeup on and it's like, oh, we're safe, we have a diversity person, then it's useless. Then
do you think that some companies actually do this in order...
Absolutely.
You know what the question is before I
Sorry.
No, it's like you totally probably thought about the topic before, which is like whether some businesses take advantage of this wave where they want to show themselves as like they are very diverse or something so that they are loved by the people when they are not actually living it.
Yeah. Or let's say a company has like sweatshops, really bad factories in Bangladesh and somewhere, and like harms women there, but then represents Asian women in their advertisement, then it doesn't mean that much. Or if a school has this diversity officer, but the enrollment of people from underprivileged backgrounds is not increasing or something, so people sometimes say, oh, there's just like the makeup, as you just said.
Empty words,
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be empty words.
Okay. So I assume that you are quite pessimistic about this approach. You think it's mostly PR and makeup, but...
Yeah, if it's PR, then... But, I mean, I think to have a black woman be James Bond, I think a great idea. Yeah, I mean...
No, but it's different when it happens naturally, as opposed than when it happens in order to be liked.
To be liked, exactly.
Like if there is a movie about I don't know, a woman hero or something, it's fine. We have had you can look at history and we have had examples of that. Like it could be a reality, it could be a fiction, or maybe a black person or whatever. But if you are going, for example, to change the movie, it was supposed to be James Bond white, and the next version you have to put. It's like as if you're doing it out of the idea. And then
on the other hand, you could argue. I mean, Sean Connery was white because the audience liked it, and now the person is black also because the audience likes it or demands it. Maybe it's just change of the times. I don't know. Yeah.
But then some people might also argue that it sounds quite condescending in a way, because when you put that black person or woman, as if you're saying like there is something wrong with you and we're putting you so that you're liked more or you're accepted more. So some people also might, think about it that way. But anyway, so what is your suggestion when it comes to communication? What is it exactly that should improve?
In communication, you mean?
Yeah, or in the exchange in general.
I think that. Well, I think Western countries, we would have to, live the values that we're actually preaching. For example, when they say, oh, the rules-based international order is in danger, because of Russia, but we have like invaded Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen. People will not take us very seriously. So if we are actually aligning our words with our values, I think then it will also lead to less confusion about motives.
But this is mostly governments and politics, and I think that the political leaders everywhere, people don't really take them seriously.
Oh, you mean on an individual level? On an individual level, I think you...
Or as cultures, for instance. Like, I wish we have more, for example, tourists. They come to, like, European... Because sometimes I feel like, especially living here in Europe, Germany knows only about Sweden and the US and France and Italy and then the Netherlands and the US. And it's like there is a pattern, like...
But you find Germans everywhere.
That's true, but I think that you guys are really rare.
Yeah. I went to Tunisia when I was 18. How beautiful.
But you said like you were a daughter of a diplomat.
No, I just traveled. I mean, it's just as a yeah.
But I mean, you grew up in a diplomatic family, so it's like you were used. But probably if you were raised like in normal family here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Well, I think, on the communication level, I think, at least for Germany, what definitely is super important, I think we really need to look at our colonial past and decolonialize our behavior in general, in politics, in the way we work. And, you know, Germany has this thing that, you know, we didn't have any colonies and we, you know, we're not, so I think that needs to be worked on. I know it's happening, but it's very slow.
But how would you solve that?
To raise awareness. Well, if I would have a solution for that, then I
Like, how
probably...
would you decolonize? Like, okay, something happened in the past. These people are dead, the ones who did that.
Yeah,
Like,
but
what are you
to acknowledge, you know, just to raise awareness, I think would already help. Like my children, none of them have ever dealt with colonies or German colonies or the past or, you know, the massacres that happened or any of that. Because I also for us, I think we're also preoccupied with our more recent past disasters that we have in our history. But I think that is very important, and I think to raise awareness and to, yeah, the way we, and now talking about how we work, I mean, in our case, we work with countries that have been colonized. How do we approach that? How do we deal with that issue that is definitely, you know, very dominant everywhere? So I think that is something that we would really need to look into.
I also like, in the past, people always talked about cultural intelligence. But there is this scholar that I like, Paul Farmer, and he said, like, actually cultural humility would be very important for a lot of people. You know, maybe to say like, oh, there, you know, are many ways to look at the world, and you know, and many ways to believe. And I think that if people were be able to be a little more relativistic and say, oh, there could be another way, you know, or it could look differently for a person from another culture. That type of humility, I think, would be important. And it also helps when you do projects, you know, because you don't assume that you know everything.
Mm-hmm. I think I would definitely agree with humility, but not with relativism. Like, it's fine if you think you're right and other people are wrong. But it's not right to take that to like a next level of confidence that you go harm them and you look at them in a condescending way, because you might be right in some things and wrong about some things.
Exactly.
And each culture has something to teach.
I think it's important to put yourself into a different perspective at some point, right? I mean, we all know that, you know, we're privileged. So if, you know, somebody who has a different perspective on the same thing, to be able to, you know, be open-minded to realize that something that appears like something to me, somebody else looking from a different perspective might see something completely different. And I think that's, yeah, I don't know if that's being humble, but it's, I guess it all lies in education. Is maybe education a solution? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have a solution to this problem, but I think it's, you know, being able to locate your own position within society and, you know, how you view things. You know, of course you might disagree with someone, but also to be able to say, okay, you see this differently, and you know, because your perspective is a different one.
You know, I think that, exactly, I agree with that fully too, you know. I think being relativistic doesn't necessarily mean that you agree totally with another value system, you know. But it means that I think that you try to understand the logics of another value system. I think that's another way of looking at the world. I think, you know, and even if you want to change a culture, you first have to understand it. You know, even if you want to do some kind of change to a culture, something that anthropologists think a lot about. For example, imagine you come to Germany and you want to change German drinking behavior. You know, you find it shocking and you say, I want to change this. If you took like a poster and you went on a demonstration, everybody say, who's this guy telling us we should drink less, you know? Mm-hmm. If you wanted to change this and do a social project, you would first have to understand like what role does alcohol play in Germany in conversations, what, you know, how does it look like from the perspective of somebody who drinks a lot or somebody who drinks very little. And then once you understand the subtleties, then you become actually a little more effective in talking to people about it. And it's, you know, essentially this always kind of the same thing when you operate in a culture that's different from your own. You know, could also be in your own country. Doesn't mean you have to travel abroad, you know, but that's kind of what I mean by like this link between cultural humility and relativism. But it doesn't, you know, if, for example, in this example, you still want to change to German drinking, you'd first have to understand what it means for Germans and different types of Germans.
But I mean, that exactly makes our work also so difficult, right? I mean, even though that we try to understand, you're never totally entrenched into a culture, especially if, of course, if you also don't live there. So that also means that, you know, there is, of course, also in our work, in our teamwork with people from different cultures, a lot of misunderstandings, miscommunications that, you know, you need to clarify, and often you don't even know that it's happening. So it's a very, there's a multi-layered complexity.
Could you give us a non-confidential example of a misunderstanding?
That's a good question.
A good question. Now that you say it, oh God, I don't know. No, I can't. To be honest, I can't.
I mean, we saw a cultural misunderstanding of the story of IKEA. But
That's an obvious.
But I also know there were misunderstandings, but sometimes you can't recall exactly. You just know they happened. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. For me, I just think that you see, like, for example, I hear a lot of people say in Germany, you're not supposed to judge, like, don't judge. Was a lot very like a popular statement to be said. And I've always thought about it differently in the sense that it's not like don't, like, for example, wherever you have a judgment of me, I'm not gonna prevent you from having a judgment, but it's just like be humble in the judgment and try to gather as much data as possible before you think about the person. If you judge from just like the tip of the iceberg, okay, this person looks like this, that's his gender, this is where he comes from, and then okay, I know what this person like. Like this is very superficial. That's somehow underestimates the complexity of human beings and to how much we're complex, and like there are multi dimensions, and to be honest, I found this stupid, not judgmental, because there is some smart judgments, you know, where people like know exactly what they are talking about because they studied the subject, but people who just like, you know, like throw these opinions out of nowhere.
Yeah, one has to be so careful, right? Because sometimes when you go somewhere else, you attribute differences easily to culture, but somehow you underestimate character, you know, and personality sometimes.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Because I think that people have this tendency to put people in boxes, probably because they are afraid. It makes it easy, just like to judge, because we don't have much time and we don't want to make a lot of efforts. Like the brain is smart and lazy at the same time, so it doesn't want to make.
Way of putting it.
Yeah, doesn't want to make a lot of efforts. You just want to be, you know, rush to judge who's your friend, who's not your friend, who's like within my circle and who's not. So the lesson being is like, let's do more efforts.
Yes,
exactly.
Don't
I think we can all agree on that. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, I mean that's all from my side. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
There's actually not much to add. Maybe one more thought. Do you think solving problems together helps with intercultural communication?
Together as a network.
As a network.
I mean, that's something we in general, you know, support a lot, is like create networks, and those networks ideally are also, you know, not north, west, south, east, but, you know, competence and interest. And I think I totally agree. I think that the only way forward is to work in networks and to collaborate. Absolutely.
Because I think that, if we could also like globally solve problems together, I think that would also help with communication.
Yeah.
I mean, the only problem is that sometimes even the what we call exchange programs that are provided by like certain organizations around the world. Like I went to an exchange program in 2018 to the United States. We studied like leadership and entrepreneurship at the University of Connecticut, and you know, it's called an exchange program, but the participants who were there, they were like mostly from MENA region. So I'm from Algeria, so Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, Egypt, and that's all. And then they call it an cultural exchange, for example, in the United States. And for me, like, I didn't exchange any culture. I already know about these.
But maybe when you were there, you exchanged culture.
But we didn't meet the locals. I didn't meet my peers.
That's a very strange program.
I didn't meet my peers. I'm supposed to meet other Americans or maybe people from other.
Yeah, I was an exchange student in the US, and it was a very great experience. It was like a school where students from all over the world in Seattle, and then I came back, and then my host brother visited me and said, now you're an exchange student.
Well, I mean, that's much better because there are people from all around the world. But to put people like, people who are the countries of around the Baltic Sea, and then there's the MENA region, and then there's the Asian.
It's a
and then
horrible labeling.
To label them like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there anything else?
No, I could give a lot of examples of that, but yeah, I think that's not necessary. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to thank you,
Thank you
again
so
for
much.
accepting the invitation, Susanne and Jonas. It was great talking to you, and I would like to extend my greeting to the audience who have been following. See you in the next episodes.
And a lot of thanks to the technical guys.
Technical guys in the background, of course. Bye-bye.
Thank you.